Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones no one can see. King Alaric has spent 10 years learning that solitude is safer than trust, that empty halls echo less painfully than broken promises. He rules his mountain kingdom alone, having banned all women from court after a betrayal that nearly destroyed him. Then Lady Serenya arrives. She's a widow who lost her husband to war, seeking trade agreements to save her people. She doesn't want his crown or his bed, just safe passage for those she protects. But when she looks at him without fear or flattery, something changes. Her quiet strength reminds him what he's been missing. When he tells her, "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years," he means with his heart, not just his eyes. What happens when two people who've given up on love find each other again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the peaks of Valdres like the ghosts of forgotten dreams, swirling around the ancient stone towers that had stood sentinel over the mountain passes for 3 centuries. King Alaric stood at the tall window of his private chamber, watching the sun struggle to pierce the gray veil that shrouded his kingdom. At 42, his dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples, and lines that deepened around his green eyes, lines that spoke of burdens carried in silence and decisions made without counsel. The castle of Valdres was a marvel of engineering and endurance, carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. Its walls were thick enough to withstand both winter storms and siege engines, its corridors wide enough for mounted knights to ride 3 abreast. Yet, for all its grandeur, it felt hollow. The great hall that once rang with laughter and music now echoed with nothing but the footsteps of servants going about their duties in whispered efficiency. Alaric's daily routine had become as rigid as the stone beneath his feet. Dawn found him in his solar, reviewing reports from his advisors about grain stores, border patrols, and the endless correspondence from neighboring kingdoms that had grown increasingly bold in their overtures since his self-imposed isolation began. He broke his fast alone, reading dispatches while consuming bread and honey with the mechanical precision of a man for whom food had become mere fuel. The betrayal that had changed everything still lived in the shadows of every room. Lady Cassandra had been everything he thought he wanted in a queen: beautiful, cultured, politically astute. She had come from the lowlands with promises of alliance and love, and for 2 years she had made the castle feel alive. Then came the night he discovered her in his brother's arms. Their whispered plans to claim his throne through poison and manipulation laid bare by a servant's trembling confession. He had loved her. Worse, he had trusted her completely, sharing not just his bed but his vulnerabilities, his fears about ruling a kingdom that seemed to grow smaller and more isolated with each passing season. The discovery had felt like a blade between his ribs, twisting with each remembered kindness that had been calculated, each gentle touch that had been a lie. His brother was dead now, executed for treason, despite Alaric's desperate hope that there might be some other explanation. Cassandra had fled in the night, taking with her not just his heart but his faith in his own judgment. From that day forward, no woman had been permitted in the royal quarters. The few female servants who remained worked only in the outer halls, and visiting delegations were informed that the king would receive only male representatives. Marcus, his chief advisor and oldest friend, entered the solar without ceremony, a privilege earned through 30 years of unwavering loyalty. At 55, Marcus had served Alaric's father before him and had watched the young prince grow from an idealistic boy into a hardened king. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his brown eyes held the patience of a man who had learned when to speak and when to simply wait. "The delegation from Thornwick has arrived," Marcus said, settling his considerable frame into the chair across from Alaric's desk. "Lord Garrett sends his regrets. Apparently his horse threw a shoe just outside our gates, and he'll be delayed until this afternoon." Alaric nodded absently, still studying a report about the failing harvests in the eastern provinces. The kingdom's isolation had protected them from war, but it also cut them off from the trade routes that once brought prosperity. What did they want this time? The usual, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Access to our mountain passes for their merchant caravans. They're offering a percentage of trade revenues and some rather impressive promises about mutual defense. And we'll refuse, as always. Alaric set down the parchment and finally looked at his friend. Our passes remain closed to foreign merchants, our borders secure. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the arm of his chair, a habit that usually preceded disagreement. Alaric, perhaps it's time to consider. No. The word came out sharper than intended, and Alaric softened his tone. We've discussed this, old friend. Valdris is strong because it stands alone. Valdris is dying because it stands alone, Marcus said quietly. Our young people leave for the lowlands because there's no future here. Our coffers grow thinner each year. Our isolation protects us from many things, but it also protects us from the trade and alliances that could help us thrive. Before Alaric could respond, a knock interrupted them. A young page entered, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, the delegation from Thornwick has requested an immediate audience. They say it's a matter of great urgency. Alaric frowned. I thought. Lord Garrett was delayed. It's not Lord Garrett, Your Majesty. The delegation is led by ... by a woman. The solar fell silent, except for the crackling of logs in the fireplace. Marcus raised an eyebrow, and Alaric felt something cold settle in his stomach. A woman? Yes, Your Majesty. Lady Serenya of House Ravenwood. She says she comes with full authority to negotiate on behalf of her people. Alaric stood slowly, his hands resting on the desk. 10 years. 10 years since a woman had requested an audience with him. His first instinct was to refuse, to send word that the king would only meet with male representatives as had been his custom. But something in the page's nervous expression suggested this Lady Serenya was not easily dismissed. What did you tell her? Alaric asked. Nothing yet, Your Majesty. She's waiting in the outer courtyard with her escort. Lord Captain Brian asked, "Am I to inform you that she's quite insistent." Marcus leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Thornwick wouldn't send a woman unless they were desperate. Their situation must be worse than we thought. Alaric walked back to the window, gazing down at the courtyard below. Even from this height, he could make out a small group of riders, their horses steaming in the cold morning air. One figure stood apart from the others, smaller than the guards. But there was something in her posture that spoke of authority rather than deference. Your Majesty? The page prompted gently. For 10 years, Alaric had maintained his isolation, had kept his heart safely locked away behind walls of stone and protocol. The routine had become his shield, the emptiness his protection. But Marcus was right about one thing: the kingdom was suffering for his choices. Perhaps it was time to at least listen to what this woman had to say. Tell Lady Serenya that she may have an audience, he said finally, his voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in his chest. But the usual protocols apply. She may bring 2 guards, no more. The meeting will be formal and brief. The page bowed and hurried out, leaving Alaric alone with Marcus, who was studying him with keen interest. You're sure about this? Marcus asked. Alaric straightened his shoulders, suddenly aware that his simple mourning tunic would not suffice for receiving a foreign dignitary. No, he admitted. But perhaps it's time to remember that being king sometimes means doing things that make you uncomfortable. As he moved toward his chambers to change into more formal attire, Alaric caught his reflection in the polished steel mirror beside his wardrobe. The man looking back at him appeared older than his years, his face marked by solitude and careful control. He wondered what this Lady Serenya would see when she looked at him, a king, or simply a man who had forgotten how to trust. Outside, the morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing the harsh beauty of the mountain landscape that had shaped his people for generations. Somewhere in the courtyard below, a woman waited who might change everything or nothing at all. Either way, Alaric realized he was about to break the most important rule he had set for himself. For the first time in 10 years, he was about to look a woman in the eye and remember what he had lost. The great hall of Valdres had witnessed countless moments of history, coronations, judgments, celebrations, and declarations of war. Its vaulted ceiling soared 40 feet overhead, supported by massive stone pillars carved with the deeds of Alaric's ancestors. Banners hung from the walls, their colors faded but their heraldry still proud, remnants of a time when the hall regularly hosted hundreds of nobles, knights, and dignitaries. Now it felt cavernous and cold, despite the fires burning in the two great hearths. Alaric sat on the throne of Valdres, a seat carved from a single block of black marble that his great-grandfather had commissioned to match the mountain stone. The throne was impressive but uncomfortable, which Alaric had always thought was intentional, a reminder that rulership was not meant to be easy. Marcus stood at his right hand, wearing his formal robes of office, while Captain Brian positioned himself near the great doors. A handful of guards lined the walls, their presence more ceremonial than protective within the castle's heart. The usual sounds of a working castle seemed muted, as if the very stones held their breath. When the doors opened, Alaric's first impression was of competence rather than beauty. Lady Serenya entered with measured steps, her dark cloak sweeping behind her as she approached the throne. She was perhaps 34, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid that revealed the strong lines of her face. Her clothing was well made, but clearly chosen for travel rather than court leather boots suitable for rough roads. A wool dress in deep blue that wouldn't show stains, and over it all, a cloak lined with fur against the mountain cold. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard. They were gray like storm clouds, and they met his directly without the calculated flutter or demure dropping of gaze he remembered from courtiers. There was intelligence there, and something else, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried without complaint. She was accompanied by 2 guards, as protocol demanded, both older men with the weather-beaten faces of veterans. One carried a leather satchel that likely contained whatever documents she intended to present. Neither looked like the sort of soldier who would be assigned to a diplomatic mission unless the situation was serious indeed. Lady Serenya stopped at the appropriate distance from the throne and offered a bow that was respectful but not subservient, the bow of one ruler to another. Alaric realized with surprise. When she straightened, she spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the vast space without strain. "Your Majesty, I am Lady Serenya of House Ravenwood, speaking with the full authority of the Council of Thornwick. I thank you for granting me this audience." Her accent carried the softer tones of the lowlands, but there was strength beneath the courtesy. Alaric found himself studying her face, looking for signs of calculation or hidden agenda, but found only directness and barely controlled urgency. "Lady Serenya," he replied formally, "you arrive in place of Lord Garrett. I trust nothing unfortunate has befallen him." "Lord Garrett is well, Your Majesty, but the situation we face required someone with different qualifications." She gestured to one of her guards, who stepped forward with the leather satchel. "I come to discuss matters of trade, but also of survival." Alaric accepted the documents, though he didn't immediately examine them. "Survival is a strong word, my lady. It's the only word that fits our circumstances." Serenya's composure slipped slightly, revealing the worry she carried. "Your Majesty, Thornwick has suffered 3 failed harvests in succession. Our grain stores are nearly exhausted, and winter approaches with unusual severity. We need access to your mountain passes to reach the grain markets in the eastern kingdoms." The passes have been closed to foreign traffic for 10 years, Alaric said, though his tone was less dismissive than usual. Something in her manner suggested this was not the typical request for trade privileges. Surely Thornwick has other options. We do not. The words came out with quiet force. The southern routes are controlled by bandits who demand tribute we cannot afford. The western passes are held by Lord Blackwood, who has made it clear that he views our desperation as an opportunity for conquest rather than trade. Marcus stepped forward slightly. What exactly are you proposing, my lady? Serenya's attention shifted to the advisor, but she directed her answer to Alaric. We offer a partnership, your majesty. Thornwick has crafters and artisans whose skills could benefit your kingdom smiths who work with steel in ways that could improve your weapons and tools. Weavers whose cloth is sought after in 5 kingdoms, scholars who have preserved knowledge of agriculture and engineering. In exchange for passage through our mountains, Alaric said. In exchange for passage, and for the right to establish a permanent trading post at the mouth of the Eastern Pass, we would share revenues from all trade that flows through your territory and provide your kingdom with first access to any goods or services we can offer. Alaric set the documents aside without reading them, a gesture that made Serenya's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Lady Serenya, these proposals you outline are not new. Thornwick has made similar offers before, as have others. What makes you believe this time will be different? For the first time since entering the hall, Serenya seemed to hesitate. Her guards exchanged glances, and Alaric sensed there was something she had not yet revealed. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but no less determined. Because, Your Majesty, I am not here merely as a representative of my people's government. I am here as someone who has lost everything to the conflicts that isolate us from one another. She reached beneath her cloak and withdrew something that caught the light, a simple gold band that she wore on a chain around her neck. A wedding ring, Alaric realized, and with that recognition came understanding of the shadows he had seen in her eyes. My husband was Captain Thomas Ravenwood of the Thornwick Guard. He died defending our borders against raiders 2 years ago, raiders who might never have dared attack if our lands were not so isolated, so cut off from the mutual defense pacts that protect other regions. Her voice remained steady, but Alaric could hear the effort it cost her. I do not come here seeking profit or political advantage, Your Majesty. I come seeking a future for people who have already paid too high a price for the divisions between our lands. The great hall fell silent, except for the crackling of the fires and the distant sounds of the castle going about its daily business. Alaric found himself looking at this woman with new eyes, seeing not just a diplomatic representative, but someone who understood loss as deeply as he did. The ring at her throat was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of love ended too soon, of dreams interrupted by the harsh realities of a world where a kingdom stood alone rather than together. You speak of loss, my lady, Alaric said finally, his voice softer than before. Tell me, what guarantee do you offer that Thornwick's word will prove more reliable than others who have made promises in the past? Serenya met his gaze directly. I offer no guarantees, Your Majesty, because life offers none. I can only tell you that desperate people keep their word because they must, and that sometimes the greatest risk is not in trusting others, but in trusting no one at all. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Alaric felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he had built around his heart. This woman had not come to flatter or manipulate. She had come because her people were dying, and she was willing to stand before a king known for his isolation and speak truth rather than comfort. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Your Majesty, perhaps we might review the specific terms Lady Serenya has proposed. Alaric stood from the throne, a gesture that brought everyone in the hall to attention. As he rose, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Lady Serenya, your proposal requires careful consideration. I will not give you an answer today. Her face fell slightly, though she tried to hide her disappointment. However, Alaric continued, I invite you and your escort to remain as guests of Valdres while I review your terms. The Eastern Tower has suitable accommodations, and you will have access to our libraries and maps should you wish to refine your proposals. The offer clearly surprised her. Your Majesty is most gracious, but our mission is urgent. Then surely a few days will make little difference measured against the years of isolation you describe. Alaric interrupted. Unless, of course, you have other appointments that take precedence over this negotiation? Serenya's lips curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. No, Your Majesty, no other appointments. As she bowed again and turned to leave with her escort, Alaric found himself watching the way she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions, but also with the careful control of someone who had learned not to show weakness. When the great doors closed behind her, he realized that for the first time in 10 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. The Eastern Tower of Valdres had been built as guest quarters for visiting dignitaries in the days when such visits were common. Its rooms were well appointed, but not ostentatious, with tapestries that told the history of the Mountain Kingdom and windows that offered sweeping views of the valley below. It had stood empty for so long that the servants had needed most of the morning to air out the chambers and light fires to chase away the persistent mountain chill. Alaric found himself taking an unusual interest in the preparations, personally inspecting the quarters to ensure they met appropriate standards. Marcus watched this with barely concealed amusement, as the king had not shown such attention to guest accommodations in memory. The Blue Chamber has the best morning light, Marcus observed, though the tapestries in the Green Room are more impressive. The Blue Chamber will suffice, Alaric replied, running his finger along a windowsill to check for dust. See that Lady Serenya has access to writing materials and whatever maps she might need from the archives. Of course. And her guards? Quarters. In the barracks, but with the courtesy due to guests, not prisoners. Alaric paused, then added, I want daily reports on their activities, but discreetly. I don't wish to appear suspicious, but neither should we be careless. The next morning brought the first of what would become a series of meetings in Alaric's private study. The room was smaller than the great hall, but no less impressive. Its walls lined with books and maps that chronicled centuries of mountain history. A large table dominated the center, its surface currently covered with charts showing the trade routes that crisscrossed the known world. When Lady Serenya entered, escorted by a servant, she carried herself with the same quiet confidence he had observed in the throne room. This morning, she wore a different dress, deep green wool, that complemented her auburn hair. Alaric found himself noticing details he had missed before. The way she moved with purpose rather than hurry. The way her eyes went immediately to the maps, studying them with the intensity of someone who understood their significance. Your Majesty, she said, offering a respectful nod. Thank you for arranging this opportunity to discuss the details of our proposal. Please sit, Alaric gestured to a chair across the table. I've been reviewing the documents you provided. Your people's situation is indeed dire. As she settled into the chair, Alaric noticed she wore the ring on her finger now rather than hidden beneath her clothing. The simple gold band caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows, a reminder of the loss that had brought her to his kingdom. The numbers don't lie, Serenya agreed, her voice steady despite the gravity of what they discussed. Without access to eastern grain markets before spring, Thornwick will face starvation. We're not seeking charity, Your Majesty. We're offering partnership with people who understand the value of loyalty. Alaric spread one of the larger maps across the table, weighting its corners with carved stones. The ancient parchment showed the mountain passes in careful detail, each route marked with notes about seasonal conditions and defensive positions. This pass here, He pointed to a line that wound through the eastern peaks, has been closed for so long that I'm not certain of its current condition. Serenya leaned forward to study the map, her proximity bringing with it the subtle scent of lavender, a scent that seemed startlingly feminine in a room that had known only masculine company for a decade. Our scouts have surveyed the approaches, she said, tracing the route with her finger. The path is still passable, though it would require some maintenance to handle regular merchant traffic. And this maintenance would be Thornwick's responsibility? Thornwick's responsibility and expense, yes. We would also provide guards for the route and maintain way stations for travelers. She looked up from the map to meet his eyes. Your Majesty, we're not asking you to trust us blindly. We're asking for the chance to prove our worth through actions. There was something compelling about her directness, the way she presented her case without flattery or manipulation. Alaric found himself studying her face as she spoke, noting the small scar near her left temple that spoke of a life not entirely sheltered from hardship. The lines around her eyes that suggested someone who smiled more often than frowned, despite recent losses. Tell me about your husband, he said suddenly, the words surprising him as much as her. Serenya's composure faltered for just a moment, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the ring. Thomas was. He was a good man, honorable, he believed. That strength came from protecting others, not from standing apart from them. He sounds like a soldier. He was, but he was more than that. He understood that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with swords, but with words and patience, and a willingness to trust when trust seems impossible. She paused, studying Alaric's face. He would have liked you, I think. He respected people who carried their responsibilities without complaint. The observation caught Alaric off guard. When had anyone last spoken to him about what he carried, rather than what he could provide? You speak as if you know something about the weight of leadership. I've led Thornwick's council since Thomas died, she replied simply. It's not the same as ruling a kingdom, but it's taught me that every decision affects lives, and that isolation, however safe it feels, is often just another form of surrender. The words stung because they echoed thoughts Alaric had been suppressing for years. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the courtyard where his guards practiced their morning drills. The familiar sounds of steel on steel, of sergeants barking orders, of horses' hooves on stone, all the rhythms of a kingdom that continued its daily life regardless of its king's internal struggles. My experience with trust has been ... instructive, he said without turning around. The last woman who sat in this room spoke similar words about partnership and mutual benefit. She nearly cost me my kingdom and my life. I'm sorry, Serenya said quietly. Betrayal by someone you love changes you in ways that never fully heal. Something in her tone made him turn back to face her. She was not looking at him with pity or calculation, but with the understanding of someone who had learned that love could be lost in ways other than death. Your husband's death was not a betrayal, Alaric observed. No, but it was a reminder that nothing is permanent, that every moment of happiness is borrowed time. She met his gaze directly. The choice we face is whether that knowledge makes us more careful about whom we trust, or whether it makes us stop trusting altogether. The study fell quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the castle. Alaric found himself thinking about the years since Cassandra's betrayal, about the safety he had built through isolation, and the price that safety had cost him and his kingdom. These trade routes you propose, he said finally, returning to the table. Tell me more about the security arrangements. The royal library of Valdres was perhaps the kingdom's greatest treasure, though few had appreciated it in recent years. Built into the castle's oldest tower, its shelves spiraled upward through 3 levels, holding books, scrolls, and manuscripts collected over centuries. The morning light that streamed through the tall, narrow windows illuminated dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. And the silence was profound, a kind of quiet that invited both contemplation and confidence. Alaric had not intended to seek out Lady Serenya there on the third day of her stay. He had simply come, as was his habit, to research a point of law regarding trade agreements with neighboring kingdoms. Instead, he found her seated at the great reading table, surrounded by open volumes and scattered parchments, her attention completely absorbed in her work. She had not noticed his entrance, which gave him a moment to observe her unguarded. Her auburn hair had escaped its braid in places, and she absently tucked the loose strands behind her ear as she read. There was something almost scholarly in her concentration, the way she moved between documents with the efficiency of someone accustomed to research. Most courtiers who visited his library did so to impress him with their learning. This woman seemed to have forgotten he existed. "Finding everything you need?" he asked quietly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up with a slight smile that transformed her serious expression into something warmer. "Your Majesty, I didn't hear you enter." "Yes, thank you. Your collection is remarkable. I found records of trade agreements dating back 2 centuries, including some creative solutions to problems similar to ours." Alaric moved closer to see what had captured her attention. The table held volumes on trade law, regional histories, and what appeared to be detailed correspondence between various kingdoms regarding mutual defense pacts. "You're researching precedents." "Always," she replied, gesturing to the documents. "Thomas used to say that most problems have been solved before. We just need to understand how others approach them." Her voice carried fondness rather than pain when she mentioned her husband, Alaric noted. The grief was there, but it coexisted with cherished memories rather than consuming them. "And what solutions have previous generations discovered?" Serenya turned one of the books toward him, pointing to a passage written in the careful script of a long-dead scribe. "King Alaric II, your great-grandfather, I believe, faced a similar situation with the Eastern kingdoms. Crop failures, economic pressure, the need to balance security with prosperity." Alaric leaned closer to read the faded text, inadvertently catching again that subtle scent of lavender that seemed to follow her. The proximity felt both natural and startling when it at last stood close enough to another person to notice such details. "He created what he called graduated trust," Serenya continued, apparently unaware of his momentary distraction. "Rather than opening all routes immediately, he started with limited-access small caravans. Specific goods, carefully monitored passage. As relationships proved stable, restrictions were gradually reduced." "A sensible approach," Alaric agreed, though. He was thinking as much about the woman beside him as about his ancestors' policies. Trust earned rather than granted. Exactly. "And look here." She flipped to another section, her finger tracing down the page. "He also required what he called binding of fates, representatives from partner kingdoms who lived permanently at court, ensuring that betrayal would harm the betrayer's own people." The suggestion made Alaric straighten slightly. "You're proposing hostages." "I'm proposing ambassadors," Serenya corrected gently. "People whose presence guarantees good faith, while also facilitating ongoing communication. Your great-grandfather chose his representatives carefully, scholars, artisans, people who could contribute to court life rather than simply serving as symbols." Alaric found himself studying her profile as she read, noting the intelligence in her gray eyes and the careful way she presented ideas that might be seen as presumptuous. She was not merely reciting history. She was building an argument, laying groundwork for proposals she had not yet made explicit. "You've given this considerable thought," he observed. "I've had little else to think about for months." She closed the book and looked at him directly. "Your Majesty, I know my arrival here was unexpected, and I know your experiences have given you reason to be cautious about trusting outsiders. But I also know that caution can become its own kind of prison if it prevents us from recognizing genuine opportunities. The words were carefully chosen, acknowledging his past without demanding details, offering understanding without pity. Alaric realized that in 3 days, this woman had managed to speak to him about trust and isolation more directly than Marcus had in 10 years, and had done so without once making him feel criticized or diminished. "Tell me about Thornwick," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "About the politics or economics, but the people. What kind of kingdom are you asking me to ally with?" Serenya's expression softened, and for the first time since her arrival, she seemed to relax completely. "It's a kingdom of craftspeople and farmers mostly. We don't have great armies or vast treasures, but we have people who take pride in their work and look after their neighbors. The baker's wife makes sure widows don't go hungry. The blacksmith shoes horses for free when times are hard. When the harvest fails, everyone shares what they have." "It sounds idealistic. It sounds like survival," she countered. "When you can't rely on wealth or military might, you learn to rely on each other. It makes us strong in ways that armies can't protect." Alaric found himself envying the warmth in her voice when she spoke of her people, the obvious affection and pride. When had he last felt that way about anything? "And they sent you to negotiate their future. They trusted me to try." She touched the ring at her throat again, a gesture that was becoming familiar. Thomas believed that leadership meant being willing to take the hardest assignments, to put yourself at risk for others' benefit. I suppose I learned that from him. "And if I refuse your proposal?" The question hung between them like a blade. Serenya was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the book in front of her. When she answered, her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort it cost her. "Then I go home and tell my people we must find another way. We ration what grain remains and hope we can make it last until spring. Some will survive, some won't. And Thornwick will remember that when we needed help, we asked honorably and were refused. No blame? No accusations of selfishness or cruelty? What would be the point?" Serenya met his gaze. "You have responsibilities to your own people, your own kingdom. I may not agree with your decision, but I understand that ruling means making choices others will have to live with." The understanding in her voice was perhaps more unsettling than accusations would have been. Alaric realized she was not trying to manipulate him with guilt or emotional pressure. She was simply acknowledging the reality of leadership and the weight of consequences. "The binding of fate's arrangement your research uncovered," he said carefully. "If such a thing were implemented, who would Thornwick send as their representative?" Serenya's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to pursue that particular detail. That would be the council's decision, of course. Someone with authority to speak for our interests, but also someone who could adapt to life at court. Someone like yourself." The words were out before he could consider their implications. Serenya stared at him, and for a moment, the scholarly composure she had maintained cracked enough to reveal something that might have been hope. That evening, Alaric sat alone in his chambers, staring at an object he had not touched in years. The morning locket lay open on his desk, its golden surface tarnished with age and neglect. Inside, a miniature portrait of Lady Cassandra gazed back at him with painted eyes that had once seemed filled with love and promise. Now they appeared calculating, cold. Oh, he wondered if that was memory or simply the cruel clarity that came with hindsight. He had kept the locket hidden in a drawer, telling himself it was to remember the lesson rather than the woman. But tonight, with Lady Serenya's words about trust and courage echoing in his mind, he found himself questioning that justification. Perhaps he had kept it not as a warning, but as a golden tether to his pain that gave him excuse to remain isolated and safe. A knock at his door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, quickly closing the locket and pushing it aside. Marcus appeared, carrying a cup of mulled wine and wearing the expression of a man preparing for a difficult conversation. "I thought you might appreciate some warmth," he said, setting the cup within Alaric's reach. "The autumn evenings grow cold quickly in the mountains." "Thank you." Alaric accepted the wine gratefully, inhaling the comforting scents of cinnamon and cloves. "Though I suspect you have more on your mind than my comfort." Marcus settled into the chair beside the fireplace, his movements careful, as befitted a man whose joints complained about mountain dampness. "The castle is buzzing with talk about our guest. The servants are pleased to have someone new to attend. And the guards speak favorably of her escort, professional soldiers who know their business but aren't looking for trouble. And what do you think of her?" "I think she's exactly what she appears to be, a woman trying to save her people, who finds herself dealing with a king who hasn't spoken to a woman in 10 years. Marcus's brown eyes fixed on Alaric with the directness of old friendship. "The question is what you think of her." Alaric sipped his wine, using the moment to consider his answer. "She's intelligent, articulate. Her proposals are well-researched and practical. She's also beautiful, though I suspect you've noticed that as well." The observation made Alaric shift uncomfortably. "Her appearance is irrelevant to the negotiations." Is it?" Marcus asked mildly. "Because I've watched you these past 3 days, and you're different when she's around. You smile more. You ask questions instead of simply listening to reports. You seem present in a way you haven't been in years. You're imagining things." "I'm observing things," Marcus corrected. "The way you made sure her quarters had the best view. The way you personally reviewed the menu for tonight's dinner. The way you've spent more time in the library this week than in the previous year combined." Alaric set down his wine and stood, pacing to the window that looked out over the castle courtyard. Below, torches flickered in their brackets, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. "Even if what you suggest were true, it would change nothing. She's here as a representative of her people, nothing more. And when the negotiations end, she returns to Thornwick, regardless of the outcome." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the careful tone he used when approaching sensitive subjects. "Alaric, what happened with Cassandra was a betrayal that cut deep, but it was 10 years ago. You've let it define every relationship since then, every decision about the kingdom's future. I've let it protect the kingdom from making the same mistake again. Have you? Or have you let it protect you from the possibility of being hurt again?" Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Look at what's happened since Lady Serenya arrived. The servants are livelier, the castle feels more alive. And you look like a man remembering what it feels like to enjoy another person's company." Alaric's hand moved unconsciously to the drawer where the locket lay hidden. "And what if you're right? What if I am attracted to her? She has her own grief to carry, her own loyalties. The last thing she needs is a king who confuses political necessity with personal interest. What if the last thing you need is to spend the rest of your life alone because you're afraid to trust anyone who might actually be trustworthy?" The words hit harder than Alaric expected. He had grown so accustomed to his solitude that he had stopped questioning whether it was necessity or choice. But these past days had shown him what he had given up, not just companionship, but the simple pleasure of speaking with someone who challenged his thoughts and engaged his mind. "She wears her husband's ring," Alaric said quietly. "She speaks of him with love and respect. I would not dishonor that memory by imposing unwelcome attention. Have you considered that there might be room in her heart for both honoring her past and embracing her future?" Marcus stood, moving to join Alaric at the window. "Thomas Ravenwood was clearly a good man, but he's gone. She's here, alive, carrying on his work and his values. That's not betrayal, that's courage." Below in the courtyard, they could see Lady Serenya walking with one of her guards, their conversation too distant to hear, but their body language suggesting comfortable familiarity. She moved with purpose, even in this casual setting, her cloak wrapped against the evening chill. She mentioned the possibility of a permanent representative, Alaric said, not sure why he was sharing the detail. Someone to live at court as guarantee of good faith. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And did she suggest who that representative might be? The conversation was theoretical, was it? Marcus's voice carried a note of amusement. How theoretical? Alaric found himself remembering the moment in the library when he had suggested she might be that representative, the flash of something hope. Surprise? That had crossed her face before she reasserted her diplomatic composure. She has responsibilities in Thornwick, he said finally. People who depend on her leadership. People who might benefit from having their leader positioned to ensure their kingdom's interests are protected and advanced. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. Alaric, I've served your family for 30 years. I've seen you carry the weight of kingship with honor and sacrifice, but I've also seen you deny yourself every comfort, every joy, every human connection that might make that burden bearable. Cassandra's betrayal taught you to be careful, but it doesn't have to teach you to be lonely. After Marcus left, Alaric remained at the window, watching until Lady Serenya and her guard disappeared into the eastern tower. Then he returned to his desk and opened the locket again, studying the painted face that had once meant everything. To him, Cassandra had been beautiful, charming, politically sophisticated, everything a king might want in a queen. She had also been ambitious, calculating, and ultimately treacherous. Lady Serenya was beautiful in a different way, not the polished perfection of court breeding, but the natural strength of someone who had faced hardship and emerged unbroken. She was charming, but without artifice. Politically astute, but in service of others rather than herself. The differences were clear when he allowed himself to see them. The question was whether he had the courage to trust his judgment again, to believe that not every woman who entered his life would follow Cassandra's path. He closed the locket with a soft click and returned it to the drawer. Tomorrow he would need to give Lady Serenya an answer about the trade agreements. Tonight, he would need to decide whether that answer included only the fate of their kingdoms, or the possibility of something more personal and far more frightening. The garden pavilion had been Queen Isabel's retreat, built by Alaric's mother in the sheltered courtyard behind the main keep. Even in autumn, it retained the wild beauty-climbing roses that had grown thick and unruly without careful tending, herb beds that had naturalized into fragrant meadows, and at the center, a small stone pavilion with carved pillars and a roof that offered shelter from mountain weather. Alaric had not visited the garden in years. It held too many memories of his mother's gentle presence, her patient lessons about statcraft delivered while she tended her plants. After her death, and especially after Cassandra's betrayal, the garden had seemed too feminine, too vulnerable for a king who had learned to armor himself against sentiment. But this morning, drawn by an impulse he could not quite name, he found himself walking the overgrown paths with Lady Serenya. She had requested the meeting, citing a desire to discuss implementation details away from the formal atmosphere of his study. The garden, she had suggested with a small smile, might provide a more comfortable setting for honest conversation. Your mother created something beautiful here, Serenya said, pausing beside a fountain that still functioned despite years of neglect. The water trickled over carved stone, creating a gentle music that mixed with birdsong and the distant sounds of the castle. I can see why she chose this spot sheltered from the wind but open to the sky. She said gardens were like kingdoms, Alaric replied, surprised by how easily the memory came. They required both protection and freedom to flourish. Wise words. Serenya touched the petals of a late-blooming rose, her fingers gentle against the delicate pink flesh. Thomas had a garden nothing as grand as this, but he took pride in it. He said growing things taught patience better than any military drill. They had reached the pavilion, and Serenya settled onto the stone bench that curved around its interior. Alaric hesitated for a moment, then joined her, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that their conversation would not be overheard by any passing servants. "You mentioned implementation details," he said, though he found himself more interested in watching her face than discussing trade logistics. "I did, though perhaps I was not entirely honest about my motives." She turned to face him, her gray eyes serious. "Your Majesty, I wanted to speak with you away from the formality of court because I believe we have reached a point where directness serves better than diplomacy." The statement intrigued and alarmed him in equal measure. What kind of directness? "The kind that acknowledges what has been developing between us these past days." Her voice was steady, but he could see the effort it cost her to speak so plainly. "I came here to negotiate a trade agreement. I did not expect to find myself drawn to the man behind the crown." Alaric felt his carefully maintained composure falter. "Lady Serenya, please, let me finish." She held up a hand, and something in her manner reminded him of the way she had presented her initial proposals, determined to be heard completely before facing judgment. "I loved my husband deeply, and his memory will always be precious to me. But I am not a woman who lives only in the past, and I think you are not a man who should remain forever trapped by his." The gentle rebuke stung because it carried truth. "You know nothing about my past. I know you were betrayed by someone you trusted completely. I know it changed how you see the world and your place in it. I know you've spent 10 years protecting yourself and your kingdom by refusing to allow anyone close enough to hurt you." She paused, studying his face. "I also know that protection has become its own kind of prison. And what would you have me do? Forget caution? Ignore the lessons experience has taught? I would have you remember that not every woman is the one who betrayed you." Her voice softened. "Not every offer of partnership is a trap. Not every expression of affection is a lie designed to serve hidden purposes." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the fountain's gentle music and the whisper of wind through the overgrown roses. Alaric found himself studying her profile, the way autumn sunlight caught the red highlights in her auburn hair, the quiet strength in her bearing, even as she made herself vulnerable through honesty. "You risk much by speaking so plainly," he said finally. "If I choose to take offense, then you would be within your rights as both a king and a man who has been hurt." She met his gaze directly. "But I believe you are also a man who values honesty, even when it makes him uncomfortable." "What are you asking of me, Lady Serenya?" "I'm asking you to consider that the trade agreements we've been negotiating might be the beginning of something larger. That the representative Thornwick sends to court might be someone you could trust not just politically, but personally." She drew a deep breath. "I'm asking you to consider that I might be that person." The pavilion seemed to grow small around them, the implications of her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Alaric realized that somewhere in the past days, the careful distance he maintained with everyone had begun to crack. This woman had slipped past his defenses not through manipulation or design, but through simple, consistent honesty. "You would leave Thornwick? Your people who depend on you. I would serve them in a different way as their voice at the court of their most important ally." She touched the ring at her throat, the gesture now familiar but somehow different. Thomas believed that sometimes the greatest service requires the greatest sacrifice. Living away from home, building new relationships, trusting new people, these would not be small things. And if those new relationships proved disappointing, then I would have learned something valuable about trust and judgment. She smiled slightly. "But I think disappointment is not the greatest risk here. What is?" "That we might find exactly what we're looking for and be too afraid to recognize it." The words seemed to echo in the garden, mixing with the sound of water and wind until Alaric wondered if the pavilion had become enchanted, a place where truth spoke itself without permission. He found himself thinking about the emptiness of his chambers, the silence of meals taken alone, The way the castle had felt more alive in the past week than it had in years. "My advisors would counsel caution," he said. "They would remind me that political alliances built on personal feelings are dangerous." "Your advisors would be right to counsel caution," Serenya agreed. "But they would be wrong to counsel paralysis. Sometimes the most practical decision is also the most personal one." A wind stirred the roses around them, releasing the scent of petals that had somehow survived the approaching winter. Alaric realized that his mother would have liked this woman, would have appreciated her directness, her strength, her ability to see past royal protocol to the human being beneath the crown. If such an arrangement were to be considered, he said carefully, it would need to serve both kingdoms equally. Personal feelings could not override political necessity. I would expect nothing less. Serenya's expression remained serious, but he caught a glimpse of something that might have been hope. Though I would hope that personal feelings might inform political wisdom rather than undermining it. The conversation had moved far beyond trade agreements and diplomatic protocols. They were negotiating something far more complex and fragile, the possibility of trust after betrayal, of connection after isolation, of building something new on the foundations of loss. They both carried. The messenger arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim with urgency. Alaric was in his study, reviewing the final draft of the trade agreement he had planned to present to Lady Serenya that morning, when Captain Brian burst through the door without ceremony. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's a rider from Thornwick. He carries urgent dispatches for Lady Serenya." Something cold settled in Alaric's stomach. Urgent dispatches from home rarely brought good news, and he had grown to care more about Lady Serenya's well-being than political wisdom might advise. "Where is she?" "Already with the messenger, Your Majesty, in the Eastern Tower," Alaric said. Aside his documents and followed Brian through the castle corridors, his mind racing through possibilities. Had Thornwick's situation deteriorated further? Was there some crisis that would force Serenya to leave immediately before they could conclude their negotiations or their more personal conversations? He found her in the tower's main chamber, standing by the window with a parchment in her hands. Her face was pale, and her usual composure had cracked enough to reveal something close to despair. The messenger, a young man still breathing hard from his ride, stood nearby with the anxious expression of someone who had delivered devastating news. "Lady Serenya," Alaric said softly, not wanting to intrude but unable to ignore her distress. She looked up at his voice, and he saw tears she was fighting to contain. "Your Majesty, she gestured helplessly at the parchment. "I'm afraid I have received news that changes everything." "What has happened?" She handed him the dispatch with trembling fingers. As he read, Alaric felt his own stomach drop. The situation in Thornwick was far worse than anyone had revealed. The grain stores were not merely low, they were exhausted. People were already dying. The council estimated that without immediate relief, half the population would not survive the winter. But that was not the worst news the parchment contained. "Lord Blackwood has made his move," Serenya said, her voice hollow. "He's offered Thornwick grain and protection in exchange for submission, absorption into his territory under his rule." Alaric looked up from the dispatch, understanding flooding through him. "And your council is considering it. They have little choice." She moved away from the window, pacing with the restless energy of someone trying to outrun panic. "Lord Blackwood's offer would save lives immediately. My mission here, our negotiations, they require time we no longer have." "How long?" 3 days. The council meets in 3 days to vote on Blackwood's proposal." She stopped pacing and faced him directly. "If I cannot return with a signed agreement and immediate relief supplies, they will have no choice but to accept his terms." The implications hit Alaric like a physical blow. 3 days was barely enough time to organize a relief convoy, let alone finalize complex trade agreements. More than that, if Thornwick became part of Blackwood's territory, Lady Serenya would no longer be free to make her own choices about where she lived or whom she served. Lord Blackwood is not known for his mercy toward former leaders of conquered territories, Alaric said quietly. No, he is not. Serenya's voice was steady, but he could see the fear she was working to control. The messenger brought other news. As well, Blackwood has made it clear that he considers me personally responsible for Thornwick's refusal of his earlier offers. He views this crisis as an opportunity to ... settle accounts. The young messenger shifted uncomfortably. Begging your pardon, my lady, but Lord Blackwood's exact words were that when Thornwick submits, he'll ensure you understand the price of defying him. Alaric felt anger rise in his chest clean, hot fury that surprised him with its intensity. The thought of this honorable woman falling into the hands of a man known for his cruelty toward enemies was intolerable. You cannot return, he said firmly. Not under these circumstances. I must return. Serenya's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Those are my people. I will not abandon them to save myself. And if you return to watch them submit to Blackwood anyway, if you sacrifice yourself for nothing, then at least I will have tried everything possible. She moved to the table where the messenger had left his travel pack, beginning to gather her things with quick, efficient motions. I should leave within the hour. If I ride hard, I can reach Thornwick before the council votes. To do what? You carry no agreement, no promise of immediate aid. Serenya stopped packing and looked at him with something like surprise. I carry the certainty that I exhausted every option, that I honored the faith my people placed in me. She paused. And I carry the knowledge that there are still good people in the world, even if circumstances prevent them from helping. The words stung because they carried no accusation, only acceptance of what she saw as inevitable failure. Alaric realized she was absolving him of responsibility for her fate, releasing him from any obligation to act beyond what prudence and royal duty allowed. It was exactly the kind of selfless grace that made the thought of losing her unbearable. What if there were another option? He said suddenly, the words emerging before he had fully considered their implications. Serenya paused in her packing. What do you mean? Alaric moved to the window, staring out at the mountain peaks that had sheltered his kingdom for generations. His mind was racing, calculating risks and possibilities, weighing the careful isolation that had protected Valdris against the cost of watching this woman and her people fall to a tyrant's greed. Blackwood threatens Thornwick because he believes. You stand alone, he said slowly. What if you did not? Your Majesty, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. He turned back to face her and saw hope warring with disbelief in her gray eyes. Valdris has remained neutral in regional conflicts for 10 years. Perhaps it is time to remember that neutrality in the face of injustice is often just another form of cowardice. The messenger looked between them with growing confusion, clearly uncertain whether he was witnessing a diplomatic breakthrough or a personal declaration. Serenya set down the traveling cloak she had been folding, her full attention now focused on Alaric. You would ally with Thornwick against Blackwood? I would protect people who deserve protection and punish a man who threatens innocent lives. For personal gain. Alaric found himself smiling for the first time since the messenger's arrival. Besides, Lord Blackwood has been growing too bold in his territorial ambitions. Perhaps it is time someone reminded him that the mountain kingdoms still have teeth. The risks are mine to take. He moved closer to her, close enough that their conversation became private despite the messenger's presence. Lady Serenya, I have spent 10 years avoiding risks, choosing safety over engagement, isolation over connection. It has protected me from betrayal, but it has also protected me from everything else, from purpose, from growth, from the possibility of building something better than what I inherited. Her eyes searched his face, looking for certainty or doubt. "You would do this for Thornwick?" "I would do this for you," he said quietly, the admission surprising him with its simplicity. "For us, for the future we discussed in the garden." The chamber fell silent except for the messenger's increasingly rapid breathing as he began to understand the significance of what he was witnessing. Serenya stared at Alaric as if seeing him clearly for the first time, her expression cycling through surprise, hope, and something that might have been wonder. "Your Majesty," she said formally, though her voice carried warmth that had nothing to do with diplomacy. "Are you proposing a military alliance between our kingdoms?" "I am proposing whatever alliance will best serve our peoples and our personal happiness." He reached out and took her hand, noting that she no longer wore gloves. Her fingers were warm and strong against his. "But first, I believe we should send this young man back to Thornwick with news that will give your council reason to postpone their vote." Serenya's smile broke like sunlight through storm clouds. And what news should he carry? That Thornwick's representative has negotiated not just a trade agreement, but a mutual defense pact, and that King Alaric of Valdris will personally ensure that Lord Blackwood learns the cost of threatening our allies. The messenger's eyes widened as he realized he would be carrying news that would reshape the political landscape of the entire region. But Alaric was watching only Serenya's face, seeing in her expression the reflection of possibilities that had seemed impossible. Just hours before, the great hall buzzed with activity as it had not in a decade. Servants hurried back and forth, preparing for what would be the most significant gathering in Valdris since Alaric's coronation. The long tables that had gathered dust and storage were brought out and polished. Banners were hung from the rafters, and the massive iron chandelier was lowered so that every candle could be replaced and lit. But it was not celebration that filled the air, it was the electric tension of momentous decision. Word had spread quickly through the castle and beyond that the king was about to make an announcement that would end Valdris's isolation forever. Nobles who had not visited court in years arrived with unseemly haste, sensing that history was being made and determined not to miss their chance to witness or influence it. Alaric stood in his private armory, allowing his squire to help him into the ceremonial armor he had not worn since his coronation. The steel was polished to mirror brightness, inlaid with silver that caught the light like captured starfire. The crown of Valdris rested on a nearby table, an ancient circlet of gold and mountain, sapphires that had graced the brows of 12 kings before him. "Your Majesty seems troubled," Marcus observed from his position by the window. The older man wore his finest robes, but his expression carried the weight of serious concern. "Second thoughts?" "Third and fourth thoughts," Alaric admitted, testing the fit of his gauntlets. "What I am about to announce will commit Valdris to a path we cannot easily retreat from. 10 years of careful neutrality ended in a single evening. And Lady Serenya? No doubts there?" The question made Alaric pause. In his preparations, in the hours since he had made his decision, he had been so focused on the political and military implications that he had almost forgotten the personal stakes involved. Almost. "She is ... He began, then stopped, searching for words adequate to describe what Serenya had come to mean to him. "She is the first person in 10 years who has made me remember that being king does not require being alone." "That is not an answer to my question." Alaric met his advisor's eyes in the polished surface of his breastplate. "I trust her, Marcus. Not because I have forgotten the lessons of the past, but because I have learned to recognize the difference between manipulation and authenticity. She could have used my attraction to her to secure better terms for Thornwick. Instead, she offered herself as guarantee of their good faith. And if you are wrong about her, then I will face the consequences as I faced them before." "Alaric," lifted the crown from its resting place, feeling its familiar weight. But I will not spend the rest of my life alone because I am afraid to trust my own judgment. Marcus nodded slowly. The worry remained in his eyes. The nobles are gathering, Your Majesty. Lord Camden arrived this afternoon with a full escort. He clearly expects to have opinions about your announcements. Lord Camden's opinions are noted and filed accordingly. Alaric settled the crown on his brow, feeling it settle into the familiar grooves it had worn over the years. Is Lady Serenya ready? She's in the Eastern Tower, making her own preparations. Her escort arrived this morning with fresh clothing and formal court dress. Marcus paused. She asked me to tell you that whatever happens tonight, she is honored by your trust. The message warmed Alaric more than he expected. He had offered her a place at his side, but she had made it clear that her acceptance depended on what was best for both their peoples. Even now, on the verge of a declaration that would change both their lives, she put duty before personal desire. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Captain Brian entered, his expression serious. Your Majesty, the hall is full. Lady Serenya has taken her place at the high table as you requested. The nobles are expectant. I imagine they are. Alaric took a deep breath, feeling the weight of armor and crown and the far heavier burden of leadership. Very well, let us give them something to discuss. The walk to the great hall felt longer than usual, each step echoing off the stone walls with ceremonial significance. Guards snapped to attention as he passed, and servants pressed themselves against the walls in respectful bows. The castle had not seen such formal ceremony in years, and everyone seemed to sense that tonight would mark a turning point in Valdris's history. The great doors swung open at his approach, and Alaric paused for a moment on the threshold. The hall was indeed full. Nobles and their retinues, merchants who had business with the crown, craftsmen whose guilds gave them right of attendance, and even some of the more prosperous farmers from the nearby valleys. Torches blazed in their brackets, supplementing the candlelight from the great chandelier, and the air hummed with barely contained curiosity. At the high table, Lady Serenya sat in the place of honor traditionally reserved for visiting royalty. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the gray of her eyes, her auburn hair arranged in an elaborate style that managed to be both elegant and practical. The difference between this regal figure and the travel-worn negotiator who had arrived a week ago was striking, but the intelligence and strength in her expression remained unchanged. As Alaric entered, the hall fell silent. Every eye followed his progress to the throne. Every ear strained to catch the first words of whatever announcement had prompted this gathering. He took his seat with deliberate ceremony, allowing the moment to build until expectation reached its peak. Lords and ladies of Valdris, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. I have called you here tonight to witness a declaration that will shape our kingdom's future for generations to come. A ripple of movement passed. Through the crowd shifted positions, exchanged glances, the subtle signs of an audience hanging on every word. For 10 years, Valdris has stood alone. We have maintained our independence through isolation, protected our people by avoiding the conflicts that plague other lands. This policy has served us well, but circumstances now require us to choose a different path. Lord Camden, a heavy-set man with graying beard and shrewd eyes, leaned forward in his seat. Other nobles showed similar signs of attention, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Tonight, I announce a formal alliance between the Kingdom of Valdris and the lands of Thornwick. We will open our mountain passes to their merchants, share our military strength in mutual defense, and welcome their representative to permanent residence at our court. The announcement sent a wave of whispers through the hall. Alliance was one thing. Valdris had maintained formal diplomatic relations with many kingdoms. But opening the passes and accepting a permanent representative suggested something far more significant. Alaric allowed the murmur to subside before continuing. This alliance serves both practical and strategic purposes. Thornwick's craftsmen and scholars will bring new knowledge and skills to benefit our people. Their trade routes will bring prosperity to our merchants. Their friendship will strengthen our position in regional politics. He paused, his eyes finding Serenya's across the hall. She sat motionless, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. But alliances built on mutual benefit alone are fragile things. Alaric continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. The strongest bonds between kingdoms, like those between individuals, require trust and shared commitment to values greater than mere advantage. Lord Camden stood, his movement formal but pointed. Your Majesty, might we know the identity of Thornwick's representative? Such a person would wield considerable influence at court. The question was exactly what Alaric had expected, and exactly what he had prepared for. The representative will be Lady Serenya of House Ravenwood, who has negotiated this alliance with wisdom, honor, and complete dedication to her people's welfare. Another wave of whispers, louder this time. The nobles were clearly evaluating this unexpected development, calculating its implications for their own positions and interests. Furthermore, Alaric said, his voice cutting through the discussion with royal authority, Lady Serenya has agreed to seal this alliance in the most traditional and binding way possible. The hall fell silent again, but this was a different quality of silence, the breathless anticipation of people who sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented. Alaric rose from his throne, his movements deliberate and ceremonial. As he descended the steps toward the high table, every eye in the hall followed him. The crown on his brow caught the torchlight, casting flashes of gold and blue around the stone walls. He stopped before Lady Serenya's chair, and she rose to face him, her composure perfect, despite the magnitude of the moment. In the flickering light, she looked like a queen already regal, composed, ready to accept whatever destiny awaited. Lady Serenya of House Ravenwood, Alaric said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Will you accept the honor of becoming Queen of Valdres, binding our kingdoms not just in alliance but in the union of our crowns? The proposal, delivered before the assembled nobility of Valdres, was both declaration and challenge. Every person in the hall understood that they were witnessing not just a political arrangement, but a king choosing to trust his heart after years of isolation. Silence in the great hall stretched like a held breath. Every person frozen in the moment between question and answer. Lady Serenya stood facing King Alaric, her gray eyes searching his face as if reading something written there that only she could see. The torchlight played across her features, revealing the careful control she maintained even in this most public of moments. Your Majesty, she said finally, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what was being offered. You honor me beyond measure. But before I answer, I must speak plainly before these witnesses. A murmur rippled through the assembled nobles, but Alaric raised his hand for silence. Whatever Serenya needed to say, he would hear it, even if it meant rejection in front of his entire court. I came to Valdres as a widow seeking aid for my people, she continued, her words carrying to every corner of the hall. I did not come seeking a crown or personal advancement. The woman who stands before you now is the same woman who knelt in these halls a week ago, asking only for the chance to save lives. Lord Camden shifted in his seat, his expression thoughtful. Other nobles exchanged glances, clearly evaluating this unexpected display of humility from someone who could soon outrank them all. I loved my husband deeply, Serenya said, her hand moving unconsciously to touch the ring she still wore. His memory will always be sacred to me. But Thomas taught me that true honor lies not in clinging to the past, but in serving the future with everything we have to give. She turned slightly, addressing the assembled court as much as Alaric himself. If I accept this proposal, it will not be because I seek power or position. It will be because I believe that sometimes the greatest service requires the greatest sacrifice. The sacrifice of our comfortable certainties for the uncertain promise of something better. Alaric felt his heart swell with admiration and something deeper, a recognition that this woman understood the true nature of leadership in ways that went beyond bloodline or training. She was not just accepting a crown. She was accepting responsibility for people she had never met, duties she had never imagined, and a future that would demand everything she had to give. "Your Majesty," Serenya said, turning back to face him directly, "when you asked me what guarantee I could offer that Thornwick would keep faith with Valdres, I told you that desperate people keep their word because they must. Tonight, I offer you a different guarantee." She stepped closer, close enough that their conversation became intimate despite the watching crowd. "I can guarantee that a woman who has already lost everything she thought mattered will fight with her last breath to protect what she chooses to build new." The words were spoken quietly, but in the perfect silence of the hall, they carried with the force of an oath. Alaric saw in her eyes not just acceptance, but understanding. She knew exactly what she was choosing, what it would cost, and what it might bring. "I accept," she said, her voice ringing with quiet certainty. "I will be your queen, your partner, and your ally in all things. I will serve Valdres as faithfully as I have served Thornwick, and I will honor the trust you place in me with every day I draw breath." The hall erupted in a sound that was part cheer, part gasp, part nervous laughter. Nobles rose from their seats, some applauding, others clearly struggling to process the implications of what they had just witnessed. But Alaric heard none of it. His attention was focused entirely on the woman before him, the woman who had just agreed to share his crown and his life. "Then let it be witnessed and recorded," he said, his voice carrying the formal authority of royal decree. "Lady Serenya of House Ravenwood shall be Queen of Valdres, partner to the crown and protector of our people." Marcus stepped forward from his position near the throne, carrying a small velvet box that Alaric had given him earlier. Inside lay the royal seal, a heavy gold ring bearing the mountain eagle of Valdres, symbol of authority that had been passed down through 12 generations of kings. But as Alaric took the ring, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of placing it on Serenya's finger immediately, he held it out to her, offering her the choice to take it rather than simply receiving it. "The crown of Valdres has never been worn by a queen who chose it freely," he said. "Perhaps it is time that changed." Serenya looked at the ring for a long moment, understanding the symbolism of his gesture. Then, with movements that spoke of both reverence and determination, she took the seal and placed it on her own finger. The gold caught the torchlight as she raised her hand, and in that moment, Lady Serenya of Thornwick became Queen Serenya of Valdres. The transformation was both instant and profound. She stood straighter, her expression taking on the quality of someone who had just accepted the weight of a kingdom's future. "Your Majesty," Alaric said formally, offering her a bow that acknowledged her new rank. "Your Majesty," she replied, returning the courtesy with perfect grace. When they straightened, they were facing each other not as king and supplicant, but as equals, two rulers bound by choice rather than circumstance, partnership rather than politics. But the ceremony was not complete, and both Alaric and Serenya understood that the most significant moment still lay ahead. The royal seal marked her acceptance of queenship, but it was what came next that would transform a political alliance into something far more personal and binding. "By the ancient laws of Valdres," Alaric announced to the assembled court, "a queen crowned before witnesses must be wed before witnesses, that the union of crowns be witnessed and blessed by the realm." A servant appeared carrying a ceremonial goblet, an ancient cup of gold and silver that had been used for royal weddings since the founding of the kingdom. The cup was filled with wine from Valdres's oldest vintage, a tradition that symbolized the deep roots and enduring strength of the royal line. "Will you drink with me, Serenya Valdres?" Alaric asked, using her new title for the first time. "Will you bind your fate to mine, your strength to mine, your future to mine, before these witnesses and before the crown that we will share?" Serenya's answer came not in words, but in action. She reached for the goblet, her fingers brushing his as she took it. The touch was electric, a spark of connection that seemed to acknowledge everything that had passed between them. The careful negotiations, the growing trust, the courage to risk their hearts after both had learned the cost of loss. She raised the cup to her lips and drank, her eyes never leaving his. When she lowered it, she offered it back to him with hands that were perfectly steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I drink with you, Alaric of Valdres," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I bind my fate to yours, my strength to yours, my future to yours, and I do so freely, gladly, and with full knowledge of what such binding means." Alaric took the goblet and drank deeply, tasting not just wine but the sweetness of possibility, the hope of companionship. After years of solitude, the promise of a future neither of them had dared imagine when she first arrived at his gates. When he lowered the cup, the hall remained silent, but it was the expectant silence of people waiting for the final moment of transformation. Marriage by the old laws required one more element, a kiss that would seal the bond before witnesses, making it not just legal but sacred. "Serenya," Alaric said quietly, though his words carried to every corner of the vast space, "I have not seen a woman in 10 years. Not truly seen one, not with my heart open to the possibility of connection. But I see you now, clearly and completely, and what I see fills me with hope I had forgotten how to feel." The confession was both intimate and public, a sharing of vulnerability that made every person in the hall suddenly understand that they were witnessing not just a political marriage, but something far rarer, a king and queen choosing each other out of genuine affection and respect. "I see you too," Serenya replied, her voice soft but carrying the quality of an oath. "I see a man who has carried the burden of kingship with honor, who has protected his people even at the cost of his own happiness. I see someone worthy of trust, worthy of respect, worthy of love." The last word hung in the air like a bell's note, clear and pure and transformative. Love, not political advantage, not strategic alliance, but the simple, complicated, wonderful truth that two people who had given up on such possibilities had found each other against all odds. Alaric stepped closer, close enough that they stood within the intimate space that belonged only to them despite the watching crowd. His hands found hers, and he felt the slight tremor that betrayed the emotion she kept so carefully controlled. "Then let us seal this bond," he said, "and let our kingdoms witness that love and duty need not be enemies, but can be the strongest alliance of all." When he kissed her, it was with the tenderness of a man who had forgotten what such closeness felt like, but also with the confidence of someone who had chosen wisely. Serenya's response was equally careful and equally certain, the kiss of a woman who understood the significance of the moment, but was not afraid to embrace it. The hall erupted in cheers as their lips met, a sound rolling through the stone space like thunder. But Alaric heard none of it. His world had narrowed to the woman in his arms, the taste of wine on her lips, the promise of tomorrow in her embrace. When they finally separated, they were no longer two separate rulers making a political arrangement. They were husband and wife, king and queen, partners in every sense that mattered. The transformation was complete, not just in law, but in the deeper truth of hearts that had chosen to trust again. "Long live the king!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Long live the queen!" came the response, taken up by voice after voice until the walls themselves seemed to shake with the sound. But Alaric only had eyes for Serenya, for the smile that lit her face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds for the future that stretched before them, bright with possibility. After 10 years of winter, spring had finally come to Valdres, and it wore the face of a woman who had taught a lonely king that love was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. 1 year later, Queen Serenya stood in the same garden pavilion, where she and Alaric had first spoken honestly about the possibility of trust. But the garden had changed dramatically since that autumn conversation. Under her careful attention, the wild overgrowth had been tamed into deliberate beauty roses trained on elegant trellises, herb beds laid out in patterns that were both practical and pleasing, and at the center, a new fountain that sang with the clear voices of mountain streams. The changes reflected more than gardening skill. They represented the transformation of Valdres itself, under the guidance of its king and queen. The mountain passes buzzed with merchant traffic, bringing prosperity that had been absent for a decade. The castle halls rang with conversation and laughter as nobles and diplomats came to court, drawn by the kingdom's new openness. Most importantly, the people of Valdres walked with the confidence of citizens whose rulers cared as much about their welfare as their security. Serenya wore a simple crown, now a circlet of gold and mountain sapphires that had been crafted specifically for her, representing her unique position as a queen who had chosen her throne rather than inheriting it. The crown was beautiful but practical, much like its wearer, who had proven that grace and strength were not opposing virtues but complementary. "Once, Your Majesty," Marcus said, approaching through the garden paths with the careful step of a man whose joints protested mountain dampness. "The delegation from the Eastern Kingdoms has arrived. They request an audience at your convenience." "Thank you, Marcus. Tell them we will receive them in the throne room within the hour." Serenya's voice carried the quiet authority she had developed over months of shared rule. The transition from widow seeking aid to queen dispensing justice had been remarkable to witness. As Marcus departed, Alaric emerged from the castle, carrying their 3-month-old daughter in his arms. Princess Isabella, named for his mother, but inheriting her own mother's gray eyes, had brought joy to Valdres that extended far beyond the royal family. She represented not just the continuation of the royal line, but proof that love could indeed flourish even after loss. "How does she fare today?" Serenya asked, reaching out to stroke her daughter's downy hair. The baby gurgled contentedly, clearly comfortable in her father's strong hands. "Like her mother, determined to have her way in all things," Alaric replied with the bemused affection of a man still amazed by the changes in his life. "She's been charming the servants all morning. Cook insists she smiled specifically at her." "She probably did. Isabella has excellent judgment about people." Serenya settled onto the stone bench, and Alaric joined her, the baby creating a bridge between them that somehow made their closeness even more intimate than it had been when they were simply husband and wife. "The reports from Thornwick?" Alaric asked, shifting to more serious matters, as was their habit during these quiet moments. "Better than we dared hope. The harvest was excellent. Trade revenues are exceeding projections, and Lord Blackwood has, apparently, given up his territorial ambitions in favor of negotiating legitimate agreements." Serenya's satisfaction was evident. It seems that despots become considerably more reasonable when they face unified opposition rather than isolated targets. The intervention in Thornwick had indeed proven successful, though not without cost. Alaric's decision to break Valdres's isolation had required careful diplomacy, strategic alliances, and ultimately, the demonstration that some lines could not be crossed without consequences. Lord Blackwood's forces had withdrawn after facing not just Thornwick's resistance, but the combined armies of 3 allied kingdoms. And our people? How do they view the changes? With approval, mostly. The merchants love the new trade opportunities. The craftsmen appreciate access to new materials and techniques. And the farmers are pleased with expanded markets for their goods. Serenya paused, considering. There are some who still question whether openness might bring dangers we haven't foreseen, but even they acknowledge that isolation was slowly strangling us. Alaric nodded, understanding the concern. Leadership meant accepting that no decision would please everyone, but also ensuring that the benefits of change outweighed its risks. So far, that balance had held. I received an interesting letter today. Serenya continued, pulling a parchment from her sleeve. From Lady Catherine of Westmark. She writes to congratulate us on Isabella's birth, but also to inquire about the possibility of arranged marriages between kingdoms. Already? She's 3 months old. Apparently, word of our successful alliance has inspired others to consider similar arrangements. Serenya's smile carried gentle amusement. Though I suspect Lady Catherine is more interested in the political benefits than the romantic possibilities. And what did you tell her? That our daughter will choose her own fate when the time comes, just as her parents did. Serenya's voice carried the quiet conviction that had drawn Alaric to her from the beginning. That love freely given is stronger than any alliance built on obligation alone. Alaric reached over to take her hand, noting that she still wore both rings, the simple gold band that had belonged to Thomas, and the royal seal that marked her as Queen of Valdres. She had never seen them as conflicting symbols, and he had never asked her to choose between honoring her past and embracing her future. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. The choice you made? The life you left behind? Serenya considered the question seriously, as she did all things. I regret that Thomas will never meet his daughter, never see what Thornwick has become, never know the peace his sacrifice helped create, but regret the choice itself? Never. She looked at him with eyes that held both sadness for what was lost and joy for what was found. You taught me that love is not a finite resource, that loving someone new doesn't diminish what came before. Thomas would have approved of what we've built together. As if in response to her mother's words, Isabella made a soft sound that might have been agreement. The family sat in comfortable silence, watching the late afternoon light play across the garden they had created together, a space that honored both wild beauty and careful cultivation. Much like their marriage itself dot in the distance, the sounds of a thriving kingdom continued, merchants calling their wares, children playing in the courtyards, guards calling the evening watch. It was the music of a realm at peace with itself, and confident in its future. Tomorrow brings new challenges, Alaric observed, as had become their evening custom. Tomorrow brings new opportunities, Serenya replied, completing the ritual that acknowledged both the responsibilities and possibilities ahead. Together, they had learned that the greatest courage was not in facing danger alone, but in choosing to trust another person with your fears, your hopes, and your heart. In a world that often seemed designed to divide people, they had found strength in unity, wisdom in shared counsel, and love in the daily choice to support each other's dreams. As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, King Alaric and Queen Serenya of Valdres sat with their daughter and planned for a future bright with promise. After years of winter, spring had indeed come to the mountain kingdom, and it would endure for generations to come.